Hello and welcome. In this video segment we will work through step 1 through 15 of tutorial 4. These steps will demonstrate how the geometry of the part is constructed. On the screen is the completed geometry with x0, y0 at the center of the part. Shortly I will create a new file and start at step 1. To start off, I will create the geometry of the pocket in the top right hand sector. I will then mirror the first pocket about the y-axis and then use rotate to complete the bottom two pockets. Let's get going and start a new part and start at step 1. I'm going to move up to the top left corner of my screen and hit the icon for new part. The center of the grid is x0, y0, our origin. To start, we're going to create a circle. I'm going to move up, select create, arc, and then move over and pick create circle center point. Now the first thing I'm going to do is input the diameter, which is 6, and then when prompted for the center point, I'm going to move on down and pick the center of the grid, the origin. I'm going to move on up and also pick screen fit. Everything looks good. Going to move over to the right and click on OK. For step 2, we're going to create a vertical and horizontal line. But before I do that, I'm going to change the color to red. Moving on down to the bottom of the screen, I'm going to select System Color, and over in the color palette I'm going to select red. And as you can see, the current color has the number 12 assigned to it. Everything looks good. I'm going to pick OK. Now let's go draw some lines. Create line and create line endpoint. I'm just going to move the prompt over to the right. To start, I'm going to select the vertical icon so we lock in just to vertical lines. Now when prompted, specify the first point. I'm going to pick a point just outside the circle, round about 90 degrees, and for the second point I'm going to move on down and pick a point approximately at 270. Now the next prompt, enter the x coordinate. I'm going to move on up and input 0. And as you can see, that line is locked in at x0. I'm going to select the apply button. The next line, I'm going to select horizontal. When prompted, specify the first endpoint. I'm going to move on down and pick a point just to the right of the circle, approximately at 0 degrees. For the next point, I'll move over to the left and pick another point outside the circle, round about 180. This next prompt, enter the y coordinate. I'm going to type in 0 and hit enter, and as you can see, that line is locked in at y0. Everything looks good. I'm going to pick the OK. Let's move on to step 3. We're going to create some polar lines. Back up, create line and create line endpoint. First thing I'm going to do is move on down, click in length, type in 4.0 for the length of this line, and then tab over. For the angle, I'm going to input 45 and then hit enter. When prompted, specify the first endpoint. I'm going to move on up, open this drop down, and then pick origin. And there's our line. Everything looks good. Going to select apply. One more line to do here. As you can see, the length is set to 4 inches. I'm going to tab over, But this time, for the angle, I'm going to type in 135. That's 90 plus 45, and then hit enter. And when prompted, specify the first endpoint. I'm just going to move on up and pick on this icon for origin. There's our line, everything looks great. Let's move on up now to the right and pick OK. Moving on now to step 4, we're going to create a parallel line. But before we do that, I'd like to change the color back to green. So move on down to the bottom of the screen. I'm going to click on System Color. Move up to the color palette. I'm going to pick green. As you can see, we're back to color number 10. And then go down the bottom and hit OK. Let's now go Create Line, and then right down the bottom here, Create Line Parallel. To begin with, I'm going to set up the distance, 0.75. When prompted, select a line. I'm going to pick this last line we created, and then for the next prompt, the offset direction, I'm just going to pick a point to the right. Everything looks great here. I'm just going to move on over and hit OK. Now we're going to move on to step 5. We're going to create a rectangle. Let's move into Create and create rectangular shapes. As you can see, the radio button is turned on for base point. I'm going to move on down now, and for the width, 2.0, and for the height, I'm going to input 0.75. I'm going to move over and hit the expand, and we've got some other options to change. Moving on down, for the radius on the corner of this rectangle, I'm going to put in 0.02, and also for the angle I'm going to set it at 45. Moving on down to the anchor position, I'm going to pick this point on the left midway. Everything looks good here. Going to move over to the graphics screen. There's our rectangle, and for the prompt, select position of base point. I'm going to move up and snap to this point. Everything looks good here. I'm going to move back and pick OK. For step 6, I need to delete some of the construction lines we created earlier. I'm going to move on up and select this line at 45, this line at 135, and this line. So I've just selected 3 lines. Going to move on up now and hit the icon for delete entities. I'm also going to do a repaint. Everything's looking good. Let's move into step 7. We're going to create some parallel lines on the inside of the part. But before we do that, let's zoom in on this pocket area. I'm going to go up and select zoom window and then draw a window around this. Now let's go into create line and then back down the bottom here for create line parallel. When prompted, select a line. I'm going to move on over and pick this line on the left hand side. And for the next prompt, let me just move the prompt over so we can read it. Select the point to place a parallel line through. I'm just going to pick a point to the right. And now I'm going to move up into the distance and input 0.35 and hit enter. Everything looks good. Let's hit apply to continue. For the next prompt, select a line. I'm going to select the line we just created and then pick a point just to the right. This time, for the distance, I'm going to input 0.25. Everything looks good. Let's go back, hit apply. For the next prompt, select a line. I'm going to move up and select this line. I'm going to pick a point below, and now back up for the distance, 0.35. Now that looks good. I'm going to hit apply. This next line, I'm going to pick the last guy and then pick a point just below, and for the distance I'm going to input 0.25. Back up again, hit apply. For the next line, I'm going to pick this line in the pocket and pick a point just below. I'm going to move up again now to the distance and input 0.275 and then hit enter, and everything looks good. I'm going to move on over and hit OK. Now we're going to move into step 8. We're going to extend a couple of lines. Let's move over now, edit, trim break, trim break. I'm going to move over and select the icon for trim one entity, and then move over and I'm going to select this line in the pocket, and then when prompted select the entity to trim extend to. I'm going to move over and pick this line, and as you can see that line has been extended to this line. For the next line I'm going to choose this line down here, and again extend to. I'm going to pick this line, and as you can see it's extended up to this line. Everything looks great. Let's move on up and pick OK. Now we're going to move on to step 9. We're going to create some lines. So let's go into create line, and we're going to use create line endpoint. Now when prompted to specify the first endpoint, I'm going to move on down. As you can see, it's snapped to the intersection of these two lines, and I'm going to move on over and snap to this point. Again, I'm going to snap to this point and then move on down and snap to that point. Everything looks great here, so back up and hit OK. For step 10, we're going to go into trim divide. So edit, trim break, and this time I'm going to pick the icon for divide. When prompted, select the curve to divide. I'm going to move on down and select this line. As you can see, it's been trimmed away. Let's move on up, pick OK. Next, for step 11, we're going to do some filleting. Create, fillet, and fillet entities. Let's set the radius up, which is 0.3, then hit enter. Select an entity. I'm going to move on down and pick this line and then this line. I'm going to move and select this line and then this line. So everything's looking great. I'm going to pick this line and then this line, this one, and then this one. So everything's worked out fine there. Let's go and pick OK. For step 12, we're going to delete some of our construction lines. I'm going to select this line, moving on down, this one, this construction line, and this one. I'm going to move on up to the top and select delete entities. I'm also going to move up and select screen fit. So there's our pocket. For step 13, we're going to mirror this pocket about the y-axis. So let's go into Xform and mirror. Now when prompted to select the entities, let's move on up and select chain. going to move on down and pick this line in the pocket, and as you can see, it's chained all the entities in that pocket. Now to end my selection, I'm going to go up to the right and hit End Selection. For mirror, I've got copy turned on, so I'm going to keep the original geometry, and what I'd like to do is mirror about the Y axis. As you can see, the preview is turned on. I'm also going to hit fit as well. Everything looks great here. Let's go down the bottom and hit OK. Let me do a screen fit. What we're going to do now is create the pockets at the bottom, step 14. What we're going to use this time is X-Form Rotate. So again, let's go up into X-Form and then pick Rotate. Now, select entities to rotate. What I'm going to do is select the All button, and then moving over to the very top, I'm going to select X-Form Result. And as you can see, this pocket is highlighted on the left, so everything looks great. Let's pick End Selection. Now, in the Rotate dialog box, Copy is turned on. For number of steps, I'm going to change that to 2. Moving on down, the angle, I'm going to change it to 90. And everything looks great. I'm going to pick OK. Let's move on up, Screen, Clear Colors, and also do a screen fit. So it's looking good. We've got 4 pockets for the price of 1, so that's a good deal. For the last step, step 15, we're going to save the geometry. File, Save As, and then you can input the name of your file. This completes this video segment. Thanks for watching.